Pack your things, old man. This is our house now, and you're making everyone uncomfortable. My daughter-in-law said that to my face on a Tuesday evening in October. My son stood behind her and said nothing. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I looked at her. Then I picked up my coffee mug, walked back to the guest room, and closed the door quietly. I didn't sleep that night. But I wasn't crying. I was thinking. Before I go any further, if you're new here, please subscribe to Pure Revenge Stories and drop a comment telling me what time it is where you're watching from. Now, let me tell you what happened next. 3 years earlier, I'd moved into that house because my son asked me to, not because I had nowhere else to go. Let me be very clear about that. I was 64 years old, recently retired, and I had more money sitting in accounts than either of them would see in a lifetime. But my son, I'll call him by what he was to me, my only child, called me on a Sunday afternoon in the spring and said, "Dad, we bought this place out in Chandler. 4 bedrooms. Plenty of space. It would mean a lot to us if you'd consider moving in. Save you the hassle of maintaining your own property at this stage." At this stage. He was 36 at the time. I was 61. I'd just sold my logistics company to a regional conglomerate for a number that made my accountant go quiet for a full 10 seconds on the phone. I was not at any stage that required assistance. But I'd also just lost my wife, his mother, 14 months earlier, and he knew I'd rattled around our house in Scottsdale alone long enough. The offer felt like love. I took it as love. I sold the Scottsdale house, made a tidy profit, moved into the guest room at the end of the hall in Chandler, Arizona, with 2 suitcases and a set of golf clubs I never used. I gave them $30,000 toward the down payment on that house. Told them it was a gift from me and their mother's memory. My daughter-in-law cried. My son hugged me for a long time. His wife. I'll call her my daughter-in-law because that's the most generous name I can give her at this point in the story. Said it was the most meaningful thing anyone had ever done for them. Every month after that, I handed my son $3,000 in cash. For household expenses, I told him. He never once objected or said it was too much or tried to give any of it back. I also cooked dinner twice a week. Drove my grandchildren, twins, a boy and a girl, 7 years old when I moved in, to school on the mornings my son left early for work. I fixed things around the house, the garbage disposal, a leaking pipe under the bathroom sink, a section of fence in the backyard that had come loose. I'm not a man who sits still. What I did not tell anyone, not my son, not my daughter-in-law, not the neighbors who saw me pulling weeds in the front yard and assumed I was the live-in help, was that I still had $4.8 million sitting in investments, managed by a private banker I'd worked with for 19 years, growing quietly every quarter. I downsized my life on purpose. Wanted to see something. Needed to see something, actually. After watching my wife's last years, the way her siblings circled when she got sick, the way certain people's warmth fluctuated with our perceived net worth, I needed to understand who my son had become. So I played the part. Modest retiree. Fixed income. Grateful for the roof. For the first year, things were fine. My son was busy, tired, sometimes distracted, but he was decent to me. We'd have coffee some Saturday mornings. He'd ask about my health, my old business contacts, things that mattered to him once. My daughter-in-law was cordial. Not warm. Exactly. Cordial, the kind of polite that never softens. Somewhere in the second year, I started noticing things. Small things at first. She stopped asking if I wanted anything when she made grocery runs, started referring to the guest room as that end of the hall, in a way that meant stay there. When I joined them in the living room some evenings, she'd pick up her phone within 4 minutes. Every time. I counted. My grandchildren were the only honest people in that house. My granddaughter would crawl up next to me on the couch and fall asleep watching whatever I was watching. My grandson asked me questions about my old work, about my wife, about what the world looked like before the internet. Those two kept me from leaving on my own terms, before the story played out. Then came the diagnosis. I'd had some shortness of breath that winter. My doctor, A thorough, no-nonsense man I'd been seeing for 15 years. Ran a full cardiac workup. The results came back on a Wednesday. Mild arterial narrowing, manageable with medication, diet, stress reduction. Excellent prognosis. I drove home feeling almost relieved. I'd expected worse. That evening at dinner, I told them. I kept it simple, accurate, some arterial narrowing, the doctor says very manageable, started medication today. Just wanted you both to know. My son put his fork down and said, "That's hard to hear, Dad." I'm sorry. My daughter-in-law said, "How serious is this exactly?" I explained again. Mild. Manageable. Excellent prognosis. She nodded and then said, "So you'll be increasing your medication costs going forward?" Not a question. My son looked at his plate. My grandkids were already done eating and in the other room. The table felt very far away from anything I recognized as family. That night, I lay awake listening to the desert silence. And then I heard their voices through the wall. The houses in that neighborhood are built economical. You hear more than you're supposed to. My daughter-in-law's voice first, tight and controlled the way people get when they've been holding something for a long time. I can't do this anymore. I mean it this time. Your father being here. It's affecting everything. The kids, our space, our privacy. This was supposed to be temporary. My son's voice, lower, murmuring something I couldn't catch. Then hers again, clearer. He's a burden. I said it. He is. 3,500 square feet, and I feel like I can't breathe in my own home because he's always here, always in the kitchen, always with the kids, always. She stopped. Then he needs to go into one of those senior living situations where people his age can be together and get the care he's going to need. My son said something about the 30,000. She came back fast and hard. That was 3 years ago. I'm not renting a facility for him out of gratitude for a down payment. Silence. Then, softer but final, give him 30 days. Tell him it's about giving him more independence. Tell him whatever you need to tell him. But I want this resolved. I heard my son say, "Okay, just okay," the same way you'd agree that, yes, the recycling needs to go out. I stood in the dark of my room for a while. I didn't feel what I expected to feel. No rage. No devastation. What I felt was something colder and more clarifying than either of those. I felt like a man who had just received the last piece of information he needed to make a decision. I walked to the closet and moved aside a hanging garment bag. Behind it, on the shelf, was a fireproof document box. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a printout from my investment account. Current balance, $4,812,000 and change. Underneath it, folded neatly, was a document my attorney had prepared 3 years ago. A promissory note, signed by my son, dated the same week I moved in. $50,000. I told him it was standard paperwork for the gift for tax purposes. He signed it in about 40 seconds without reading past the first paragraph. The terms were clear and legal and witnessed. Principal plus 4% annual interest with an acceleration clause at my discretion. I closed the box, set it back in the closet, and went to bed. I slept fine. The next morning, my son found me at the kitchen table before the kids were up. He made coffee and stood with his back against the counter for a while. Then he said, "Dad, we've been talking, and we think it might be time to look at some options for you. More independence. Your own space. It might actually be better for your health. Less stress." I looked at him over my coffee cup. "How long do I have?" He blinked. 30 days. "We want to give you plenty of time to." I said, "That's fine. I'll be out in 2 weeks." He looked relieved. That's exactly what I'd expected. I spent that morning in my room with my laptop. My private banker, a man I'll call by his role because he's earned his privacy, answered on the second ring and had $600,000 cleared into my checking account within 72 hours. My attorney, the same one who'd prepared the promissory note 3 years prior, took my call between his own appointments and stayed late to start the paperwork. I contacted a real estate agent in Scottsdale, not Chandler, not anywhere near that house. I wasn't going backward. I was going somewhere I chose for reasons that were mine. I spent 3 days driving through North Scottsdale, Paradise Valley, the older established neighborhoods near the mountains. I found a property on the fourth day. Single story, 3 bedrooms, a wide covered patio looking out at a stretch of desert that nobody could build on. Clean lines, quiet street, private gate. The sellers had already relocated. Cash offer, close in 7 days. The agent called me back within the hour. Done. I packed over the following week in the mornings while my son was at work and my daughter-in-law was at her spin class, and the kids were at school. I packed methodically, without sentiment, without noise. I bubble-wrapped my wife's photographs last because I needed them on the wall until the final morning. The night before I left, I wrote a note. I wrote it and rewrote it 5 times. The version I kept was this. Thank you for the past 3 years. I found a place that suits me and will be gone by morning. I wanted to leave this month's contribution, even though I'm leaving early. It seemed right. Grateful for the roof. Dad. P.S. A burden has packed his own bags. Hope that's a relief. I set the envelope on the kitchen counter with $3,000 in it, same as every month. Next to it, the key to the house. I walked out at 6:45 in the morning. The moving truck had been there since 6. Professional crew, fast and quiet. They were done in under 2 hours. The drive to Scottsdale took 40 minutes. I followed the truck through streets that were already bright in the November sun. The new house smelled like fresh paint and empty rooms. The movers set my furniture in place, thanked me for the tip, and left me standing in my own living room, in complete silence. I made coffee in my own kitchen, stood at my own window, watched a roadrunner cross my back patio like it owned the place. My son texted at noon, "Got your note. Hope you're comfortable. Let us know if you need anything. I read it twice." Didn't respond. The next 11 days were quiet. I unpacked, established routines. Took my medication at the same time every morning. Walked 2 miles before breakfast. Started reading again. Something I'd stopped doing in that house, because I'd never fully felt like my time was my own there. I slept 8 hours a night in a bed no one had opinions about. On the 12th day, my attorney called, ready to proceed. I said yes. He'd already drafted the letter, formal, clean, devastating in the way only legal language can be. Pursuant to the acceleration clause in the promissory note dated November 14th, 3 years prior, my son's signature, witnessed and notarized, the full balance was now due within 90 days. Principal of $50,000 plus compound interest at 4% annually. Total owed $58,400 and some change. Not a fortune. That wasn't the point. The point was the letter arriving certified mail at a house where my son and his wife had just finished congratulating themselves on resolving the burden problem. My attorney also sent a separate correspondence to my son from my investment firm's holding company, a document my son had never seen before, a summary of assets under my name. My son would be meeting with a financial advisor named Marcus. No, wait, I can't use that name. The advisor's name isn't important. What's important is what happened when my son read the number at the top of that document. $4,800,000. My attorney told me later that my son sat in the chair across from him and did not speak for almost a full minute. Then he said, "This has to be wrong." It's not wrong. He's been giving us $3,000 a month. He lived in our house. Your father lived in your house by choice. He contributed to expenses by choice. He was never in financial need. My son said, "Why would he?" and then stopped. Because he understood. Not all of it, maybe, but enough. My attorney said, "Your father also wanted you to know that his estate planning has been updated. His current beneficiary designation has changed. He'll be in touch when he decides to be." My son drove home and told his wife. I know because she called me 17 times in the next 2 hours. I watched the phone light up from the other side of my living room and did not move toward it. My son called 4 more times. Then texts started. "Dad, please call me." "Dad, we need to talk." "Dad, I had no idea. I swear, I had no idea. Please, just let me explain. I let 5 days pass. Changed my number on the 6th day. Kept my old phone active in a kitchen drawer to track incoming messages. On the 9th day, they found me. I was reading on the patio when I heard a car slow on the street, then stop. I set my book down and waited. The gate intercom buzzed. I let it buzz 3 times before I walked to the panel. My son's voice. Dad, please. We just want to talk. I pressed the button. I'll come to the gate. I walked out the front, unhurried. Took my time. They were standing on the sidewalk. Both of them. My son looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week, because he probably hadn't. My daughter-in-law's face was something I hadn't seen before on her. No yoga calm, no careful politeness, just raw, exposed, the look of someone whose story about themselves has been taken away. I stopped at the gate and looked at them through the bars. Dad, my son started. He got as far as that one word before his voice broke. He took a breath and tried again. I don't have a speech. I'm sorry. I failed you. Mom would be ashamed of me, and she'd be right. That hit something. He knew it would. He knows me. My daughter-in-law said, Silas, then caught herself because she'd always called me by my first name, which I tolerated for 3 years. She started again. She said, I called you a burden. I said you needed to leave. I meant it when I said it, and I have thought about nothing else for 9 days. I was wrong. Not because of the money. Because of what I said and what it meant about who I'd become. I looked at her for a long time. Can we come inside? My son asked. Just to talk, like family. I said you gave me 30 days and asked me to leave the house I helped you buy. I was out in 14. I can give you 10 minutes at this gate. My daughter-in-law closed her eyes. My son said, fair. I asked them one question. Not about the money, not about the house. I asked when your mother was sick. His expression flinched. Did you ever wonder whether the people around her actually loved her, or whether they loved what she represented? He didn't answer right away. Then he said, yes. I wondered. I said, I had been wondering the same thing about myself for 3 years. I needed to know. Now I know. My daughter-in-law said, the kids ask about you every day. My granddaughter cried when I left without saying goodbye. The twins are 9 now. Those kids didn't do anything. I know that, I said. This has nothing to do with them. I told them I'd send formal terms through my attorney within the week. Then I walked back inside and closed my front door. That evening, sitting in my home office, a real office this time, with a proper desk and my wife's photographs on the wall and no one on the other side of a thin door having opinions about my existence, I drafted my terms. The promissory note did, $58,000. They had 90 days. I knew they couldn't pay it in cash. I was counting on that, actually, not to destroy them, to teach them the specific sensation of owing something you cannot immediately discharge. I'd lived 3 years in a house where I was always slightly in the wrong amount, always slightly not enough, always slightly in the way. I wanted them to know what that felt like from the financial side. My estate would go to charity, significant portions to a literacy nonprofit my wife had volunteered with for 11 years before she got sick, and to a business mentorship organization I'd started working with that fall. My grandchildren would receive $2 million each in a trust, accessible at 25. My son and his wife, $100,000 combined, from $4.8 million, $100,000. The rest was consequence meeting action, nothing personal. Just math. I also outlined the non-financial terms, which mattered more to me than any of the numbers. Family therapy, minimum 6 months, required to maintain any relationship with me. Public acknowledgement of the situation to our extended family. Not social media, not performative, just honesty with the 20-odd people who mattered. And boundaries, clearly stated. My home, my schedule, my terms, always. The certified letter with the promissory note demand arrived at their house on a Thursday. My son called my attorney 4 times that day. The following Monday, they met with a banking officer about a home equity loan. The officer told them there was already a lien on the property, the promissory note, properly filed 3 years prior, and that no additional lending was possible until it was satisfied. I'm told my son sat in the bank parking lot for 40 minutes after that meeting. Over the following weeks, I watched through my attorney's updates as they sold things. Designer furniture. Electronics. A motorcycle my son had bought himself 2 years ago that he rode exactly 6 times. Jewelry. They borrowed from her parents, who did not know the full story, and therefore judged her in ways I didn't orchestrate and didn't need to. They accumulated $43,000, still $15,000 short of the demand. On the 61st day of the 90-day window, my son sent me a handwritten letter. He'd gotten my new address from my attorney with my permission. He sent it through the mail, the actual postal mail, which told me he'd thought about this. The letter was 2 pages, no excuses, no legal maneuvering. He wrote about his mother, about watching me care for her in her last 2 years, how I never complained once, how she told him in the hospital that I was the best decision she'd ever made. He wrote about how he'd let himself be shaped by someone else's values, his wife's. He was honest about that and lost track of what he'd been taught. He wrote, I think I knew, somewhere, that you weren't struggling. I think I chose not to examine it because examining it would have required me to look at what I was accepting from you while looking the other way. That sentence cost him something to write, I could tell. His wife added a postscript. Different handwriting, smaller letters. She said, I have been trying to write this for 7 weeks. Every version sounds like an apology for getting caught. I think maybe this time I'm actually apologizing for the thing itself, not the consequences. I don't know if that's enough. I know it might not be, but I wanted you to know the difference existed. At least this time. I read both pages 3 times. Then I called my attorney. Draft a settlement. He'd already anticipated this. The terms came back to me within 24 hours and I signed them. They would keep the $43,000 they'd assembled. I'd forgive the remaining balance. The debt ended there. Full stop. The will remained as written. My grandchildren's trusts intact, my son and daughter-in-law receiving what I designated. Charity receiving the rest. The therapy requirement stood. The family acknowledgement requirement stood. I called my son the morning the paperwork was finalized. He answered before the first ring had finished. I said, I've accepted your settlement terms. Everything goes through Patricia, my attorney. She'll send you the documents today. He said, Dad, and stopped, then started again. Thank you for not finishing us. You could have. I said, I know. But the point was never your destruction. The point was whether you were capable of understanding what you'd done. The jury's still out on that, but you wrote that letter. That matters. He was quiet for a moment. Then, is there any path back with you? I said, yes, but it doesn't look the way it used to. It can't. You start from where you actually are, not where you wish you'd stayed. He said he understood. I think maybe he did. The family gathering was at my cousin's home in Tempe 8 weeks later. 15 people, close enough to matter. My son and his wife stood up together in the living room. My son spoke first. He was honest in the way that costs something, not the polished honesty of people who've rehearsed it until it sounds like virtue. He was honest the way people are when they've run out of better options and finally understand that honesty is the only option worth taking. He said he had failed his father. He said the cruelty had been real, even if unexamined. He said he was working on being worthy of the family name his father had spent 40 years building. His wife spoke after. Her voice shook. She did not flinch from what she'd said that night through the wall. She repeated the word she'd used. Burden. She said it clearly in that room full of people who all knew what it meant, that she'd said it, and she took responsibility for it. I did not perform forgiveness. I said I accepted their acknowledgement, and that I was watching to see who they became next. I said that actions were the only language I was fluent in at this stage of my life, and that I'd be reading carefully. The room was very quiet. My cousin pressed my arm when I sat down. 6 weeks after that gathering, I met the twins at a diner near their school. My son dropped them off and waited in the car, which was exactly the kind of boundary I'd asked for. They were nervous for about 4 minutes, and then my grandson ordered a double stack of pancakes and told me about a science project involving volcanoes. And everything was fine, in the way that only children can make things fine. My granddaughter looked at me across the table with her grandmother's eyes. She has her grandmother's eyes, this one, and said, "Grandpa, are you going to be around now?" I said, "I'm going to be around on Saturdays." "That's a promise. 1 Saturday a week, you two have me." She said, "What if we want more?" I said, "Then we'll renegotiate." She thought about this very seriously and said, "Okay." I took my medication on schedule every morning, walked my 2 miles, had the diner pancakes with my grandchildren on Saturdays, started mentoring 2 young entrepreneurs through the nonprofit downtown, one of whom reminded me so much of myself in 1987 that I had to stop myself from telling him things that weren't my story to tell yet. In February, my attorney called to confirm the grandchildren's trusts had been legally finalized and filed. $2 million each, untouchable until they were 25. My son had signed the acknowledgement that he had no access to those funds. My attorney said he signed it without any visible hesitation, which told me something. My son and his wife had started therapy. I knew because the therapist's office sent me a confirmation of their enrollment as I'd required. They were going. Every Tuesday, I did not know whether they were changing or performing change. That distinction takes years to see clearly. I was 65 years old. I had years. I'd wait and watch and decide what I saw. What I knew for certain was this. I woke up every morning in a house I'd chosen, in a room filled with my wife's photographs and my own books and my own silence. I made my own coffee. I kept my own schedule. I drove my own car to meet my grandchildren on Saturdays, and no one in that car ride had an opinion about whether I was taking up too much space. 3 years I had lived small and grateful in a house where I was tolerated. 3 years of making myself invisible so I could see who they really were when they thought no one important was watching. I had my answer. I'd taken my $4.8 million with me when I left, and the house I lived in now, on the quiet street in North Scottsdale with the desert outback and the private gate and the roadrunner that crossed my patio every morning like he owned the place. He might. I didn't mind. We understood each other. Some people spend their whole lives waiting to feel at home. I'd felt it the first morning here, standing at my kitchen window with my coffee, watching the sun come up over the mountains. That's enough. Sometimes, that's everything. If this story meant something to you, please like this video and subscribe to Pure Revenge Stories. Tell me in the comments what time it is where you are and what part of this story hit you hardest. And if you'd like to hear the next one, it's waiting for you right now. I've thought a lot about what made me stay silent that night. When I heard her voice through the wall, calling me a burden, telling my son she wanted me gone, I could have walked down that hall and said something. I could have corrected her. I could have told them both exactly who they were talking to, and exactly what they were about to lose. I chose not to. And I've spent months since then trying to understand why, and what that choice actually meant. I think it comes down to this. There are 2 kinds of people in a hard moment. There are people who speak because they want to be heard, and there are people who go quiet because they are thinking. I've always been the second kind. My wife used to say it was my most frustrating quality, and also the one that served me best in business. She wasn't wrong about either part. What I've learned, not from this situation alone, but from 65 years of watching how things actually work out, is that how you treat people when you think they have nothing left to offer you is the most honest thing about you. Not your charitable donations. Not your public kindness. Not the way you talk about family at Thanksgiving. The way you talk about someone through a wall when you think they're asleep. That's the truth. My son is not a bad man. I want to be clear about that. He made bad choices under pressure from someone he loved, and that is a different thing than being bad at the core. I've watched him in the months since everything came to light, and I've seen a man genuinely trying to reckon with something that cost him. That's not nothing. A lot of people, when caught, look for someone else to blame. He didn't. He wrote me a letter by hand, through the postal mail, and in it he named his own failure directly. That took something from him. I respect that it did. My daughter-in-law is harder for me to assess, and I know it. She was honest in that coffee shop in a way I hadn't expected. She said the apology was for both reasons, the money and the wrong, and she admitted she couldn't fully separate them yet. That kind of honesty, the kind that doesn't flatter you, is rarer than people think. I'm watching. Like I told them both, actions are the only language I trust at this point in my life. The twins are 9. My granddaughter has her grandmother's eyes. My grandson ordered double pancakes on our first Saturday and talked for 40 minutes straight about volcanoes. Those 2 kids have no part in what their parents did. They never will. Whatever I built over 60 years, the work, the patience, the careful management of money and relationships and reputation, it was always going to end up somewhere. I'd rather it end up protecting them than punishing the people who raised them. What I want anyone to take from this, if they take anything, is simple. Work with integrity even when no one's tracking it. Treat the people closest to you as if they matter most, not least, and understand that the people who love you only when you're useful are not loving you. They are using a version of you that serves their comfort. The moment you become inconvenient, you'll know the difference. I know the difference now, and I woke up this morning in my own house, made my own coffee, watched the sun come up over the desert, and felt something I hadn't felt in years.